This one goes.
Situation and circumstance. Fight for wisdom, not ignorance. Trying to avoid it is not a lonely dance. Can we see each other with only a glance? Situations and circumstances. Fight for wisdom, not ignorance. Trying to avoid it is not a lonely dance. Can we see each other with only a glance?
Cake mix and race mixes, matrix, kill the witches, 3 digits, made of sixes, KKK or white privilege, old spirits, blood riches, real hatred, fake forgiveness, skinny image, fat problems, I don't really know how we solve them, gods made us, kings gave us, to enslave us, castaways on railways, underground dark web pages, Marvel heroes, connect the zeros, connect the pharaohs, bone marrow, Egyptian princes, dark and ancient, preserve the patience, black and Haitian, white and Asian, British coaches, eat crustaceans, ocean roaches, Illuminati inject the bodies, GMOs, drug hobbies, Aboriginal, Pan-African, old biblical, reincarnation, hip-hop playlists, vocal ranges, sexist wages, sex changes, the game of life, bullets fly, ruin nights, players clueless, kids' rights, humans fight, nature loses, hard of hearing, dolomite, Darwinism, Garvanite, hates a virus, terabytes, hard to live with parasites.
Once again, once again, welcome to another beautiful Tuesday. Here at Situation and Circumstances here at KCBZRadio.com. And I'm glad that you all have made it again. We got a real good show lined up for you. But before we jump into some of that, won't you say what's up to the people? Of course, I got my man Julius in the house. That's part of the TMT, the best team ever. What's happening,
What up?
Patty?
What up? Once again.
Hey, you see, you always wanted to say the once again part, right? And even right then, you was like, I've been wanting to, and I really didn't get it off right then. That was just kind of you. But you know, one day you too can say once again. No, look. Okay, so
How you doing?
I'm doing good, man. What's up with you? How you feeling? How your spirits?
I'm okay. I'm okay,
Yeah,
man.
yeah.
Any updates? Any updates in the Bay Area?
Well, I think COVID is an update all over the place. Hey, listeners, one of the things we don't want to do is, we all know what's going on and with this, or we have our different ideas what's going on with the COVID virus. And I don't want to bring that up so often as to just bog us down. Some of us want to listen to shows to kind of escape that madness. But how can you escape something that's keeping you in your home right now, or at least attempting to? Right. And so, but one of the things I've noticed happening a lot of that I've been enjoying is seeing different of my favorite stars just doing stuff. Right. So I don't know if you've seen like um, what's his name? Faith Afian and
Afion Crockett?
uh,
Afion Crockett?
yeah, with Kevin Hart, they going back and forth on it. If you haven't seen that, you got to go to YouTube and check that out. It's funny, and it
Okay.
sounds like it remind me of me and you, like how I might just call you and see you and be like, "Hey, look at you with your wide garage door nose," or something I might say to you, and they just acting, they just acting like real family members that's just talking crazy, right? But it's real fun. And then I also been checking out. They've been having a lot of battles with producers. So I saw
Yeah,
Neo and Junta,
yeah.
which I didn't even know who Junta was until they
Me
started
either.
drop till he was dropping hit after hit. I was like, whoa!
Yeah,
You got to check that one out too,
yeah. I never heard of Cat. And he's over here
yeah,
fighting for most of the Leah joints.
right. That was pretty phenomenal to me as well. So I'm saying that to say that of course we're dealing with this COVID thing and you're gonna hear with anything that's not something that we wish upon each other. You're gonna hear some You're going to get tired of hearing about it. You're going to need to hear about it in spite of that. And one of the ways, one of the things we certainly got to do is keep each other abreast of any new information that's coming out. Um, we've talked about this a few times now, and I don't know if I've ever mentioned how disproportionately African Americans are, according to some sources, how disproportionately African Americans are dying from this
Yeah,
comparatively to other cultures. And depending on how you think of that, right? Is it because, I mean, first of all, are you surprised when you hear that,
not at all. Not
right?
at
I'm not too surprised either. But you know what? Hey, let's do this because we have a real big show for you tonight. We'll be talking about, um, speaking of how COVID affects African Americans. We want to dive a little bit into, um, and shift a little bit into how are our boys, our black men. We want to look at some of that treatment and not just the obvious stuff, right? You know, we know who's getting shot, who's the highest death rate in terms of, certain of these things. So we're gonna go into a little bit of that.
all.
We're gonna talk about how the media portrays our boys and men, and what kind of advice we might have to give them. And so
Let's
stay
do it.
with us, of course, here at kcbzradio.com. We'll be right back with that and more here at Situation and Circumstance. Mm.
That's real. You know, when it comes to just being black in maneuvering and just experiences, and I know you work with kids, so I'm interested into how you have to either change your tone of voice when talking to other people, or how do you relate to young kids that are black that you don't have to do for white kids, Asian kids, Hispanic kids, or even teachers. I'm interested in how you maneuver as a black man with locks, talking to younger black kids.
um, you know what, Julius? I I see it. I see the mistreatment and the miseducation in all kinds of different ways, with working at the school. So, an example I can give you. So, I was at a school, and I was a path on the playground, something that we call a peace path in the company that I work for. And I was painting that, and there were two kids. There was a little white boy, a little black boy. They might have been about, I don't know, maybe about 11, 10, between 10 and 12. This is at an elementary school. And the little white boy, he had some flavor about himself. He was like, "Hey, you can't handle me. I'm too good with this. I'm too good with this." And he's talking about the basketball, right? And he's like, "I'm too good with this. I got hands. You can't stop me. I'll eat you up." And then the little black boy responded to him, and he was like, "What? What are you talking about?" He's like, "I'll murder you all over this court. You can't even handle this. I got skills." Now, when he said that, one of the yard duties, yard monitor, those are the adults that are on the playgrounds at the schools, keeping our kids safe and making sure, kind of, those are the monitors. And one heard that. And she came over and she's like, "You can't tell people that you're gonna murder them." She's saying this to the little black boy. "You can't tell them you're gonna murder them. You can't threaten people's lives." And he's like, "What are you talking about? I didn't threaten anybody's life," because he's not looking at it that he said something that was threatening life, right? So then well, now you're lying too. So now not only are you threatening his life, but now you're also a liar. And she's
Wow.
taking him to the office, and I had seen this whole thing happen. So of course I went in and I talked to, I teach social emotional learning and some of those things, and I'm there for that purpose anyway, to some degree, to see if there's a way that we can use some compassion and empathy to look at these different situations and circumstances. And so I went inside there, and the parents had got called, and the yard duty is real upset, and she's describing it. By now the little black boy has went from, I saw him go from confusion to them being nervous and scared that he's going to get in trouble, to them being angry, right?
Hmm.
Because he's being accused and he doesn't understand why all of this is happening just from some things that he's saying. So there's a few things that's wrong with this, right? So of course, one might say, well, should he have said a word like murder in a sensitive word like murder on a playground at a school, right? There's that argument to it because that's, kids, a lot of things are happening at these schools that make kids unsafe. A lot of violence, Columbine, all these different things. And then you have another person who's probably listening to this is saying, well, she should have been able to knew or know that he was just, responding that this is just how they talk. But we take for granted that everybody has that diversity, and they don't. And teachers are not trained in the arts of diversity. They
Yeah.
get it by either because they happen to want to take more of those classes, or they got it through experiential learning where they've worked with a lot of different cultures and they've learned it like that. But I think we automatically assume that teachers, right, would be some of the most diverse human beings out there, but they're not taught. That's not the part of the requirement, or at least it hadn't been one of the requirements for you to be a teacher. So what ended up consequently happening is this yard duty learned that she needed to learn a little bit more about her kids and those behaviors. At the same time, now we had to step into also teaching the young black boy the realities of the world that he lives in at an age he probably didn't even want to go through that at, right?
Yeah.
And had to let him know you have to learn to code switch,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm. Now that's interesting. So these kids are kids, right? So they don't really know the idea of code switching yet. However, adults do. So is it the yard duty's duty to be able to know the environment that he or she is in, right? Like say for cops are sometimes are policing neighborhoods that they don't even live in, right? Which you have that little friction, you have that barrier. And I know personally, I know two cops who are born and raised in Oakland, but they're policing in like Daly City because the money. I guess I, I'm assuming it might be a little better. I don't know, but that's not their habitat. That's not their environment that they're accustomed to. So whose responsibility is it? Is it the ones who are in their own neighborhood who are talking the way that the majority of them talk, or is it the ones who are looking over that neighborhood and they have authority over those people? They have some legal responsibility to know what these kids or what these civilians or what these tourists are talking about.
I mean, I think that there's shared responsibility.
Okay.
So I do think that there has to be more focus on teachers learning having a little bit more depth in um, in oppression or oppressive, anti-oppressive methods, and then of course, diversity and those things that fall in there. But not when we think about. I used to teach diversity and sensitivity. And one of the things when we're teaching this, right, is people get taught a real surface amount of it, right? They get taught some simple things. If you're part of certain Asian cultures, it may be culturally inappropriate for girls to look at men in their eyes. And then in certain Latino cultures and Asian, as a matter of fact, it's women are not allowed to address men a certain way and look in their eyes. And some may not, whether a person is in agreement or not of what that culture does. If you understand that that's what's happening, and someone of that culture is speaking to you, instead of assuming that what we assume in this country is if someone's scared to look at you in your eyes, that maybe they're lying, or maybe there's just some deceit or dishonesty there. Well, not in that. Well, every culture that's not the same for. So I think that generally speaking, there needs to be um, schools, districts, police, any of these institutions, the police department. There has to be more work done on cultural sensitivity and cultural relativism. Um, so that's first. On the other hand, if you have black boys, or you have boys, even just people of color, but certainly specifically the darker you get, the worse it seems to get.
Right.
And so I do think that you also have an obligation, an unfortunate obligation as a parent at home to teach your young black boy and girl what they may be, what they may be, and most certainly are going to be facing in different ways.
See, that's a
And
tough one.
I don't think
That's
we should
tough,
have
man.
to, but
Right. Yeah, and the reason why that's very tough is because we move culture. Right? Like black people, black men, black women. We're talking about code switching.
welcome.
We we move culture, and people want to be like us. People emulate and duplicate us. We have to know what Seinfeld is. We have to know what Martin is at the same time. We have to know what Friends is, but we also have to know what In Living Color is. Um, they don't do that for us. They don't do that for us. They don't care. They're more, and I know this is kind of going a different way with code switching, but we focus so much on integrating and being involved so they can understand us, while they're not so willing to understand us at the same time. We want to understand them because we want to get the money, right? We want to move into the neighborhoods. We want to go higher status. We want to wear what they wear so we can kind of be seen like them. They don't want to be seen like us. They don't care about us. They want to.
They want
Take
to be seen like us, an
nobody wants to.
appearance, but
Nah,
not in what happens to us as a result of really being this way. But it looks like who is this we have joining us right here?
this is my man Todd. Todd, introduce yourself, brother. I can't hear you.
Hey Todd, we can't hear you right now. Go ahead and press a few things. Not yet. You're on mute.
Nope.
No, no sound there. Once again, you're here, Situation and Circumstance on kcbzradio.com. Currently, we're waiting on our friend to log in with us. Um, and we're talking about black men, black boys. We're going to be talking about how the media sees us. We're talking about currently we're in the moment of speaking on uh, code switching
Yeah.
and what should be done, whether it's at schools or what have you. Whose responsibility is it?
Because I know some cats who at work um who we have a natural culture. We have a culture to us. Black people, we have a culture, and we sometimes abandon it, trying to fit in, trying to get more money. Like
We,
we're climbing this ladder, we're climbing this block, trying to do something that's might be opposite of our culture. Because right when we get at home, we do it. Right when we're around our homies or around our women, we do it. But as soon as we're around something that involves money, something that involves a little capital, we say, "Oh man, you know how it is. Got to play the role. Got to play the part." And I get it. I definitely get it. I understand it because I mean, got to pay the bills. But at what point can we just be ourselves and thrive? Right? Like, at what point can we be ourselves, and if that is yourself, cool. But at what point do we change so much that we can be ourselves 24/7 and not be scrutinized? Just earlier this year or last year, Gavin Newsom
mhm.
passed the Crown Act, in which outlawed jobs in California, at least, that they can't discriminate against hair.
Yes, thanks for explaining that because there's somebody online that was like, the crown, what's a crown royal? What you mean? So thank you for where so specifically that you can't be discriminated against, or no one can even say something to you about the style at which you wear your hair to some
Right,
degree, right? Is
right.
that pretty accurate? Mhm.
Yep. And that's weak. That's weak to me. I mean, I get it. It's progressive, but that's not an accomplishment, man. That's not a I don't I get where they're trying to go with that. However, we shouldn't be begging and celebrating for giving us something that should have been already there. Right? It's like if I take air from you and I'm going to you take it back, and then I'm celebrating you for giving it back to me. That's something that I have a huge
I
problem
don't,
with
but
that, man.
I don't know if because I'm happy the law came out, but I guess for me, it's like, I don't know if it's a question of celebrating it as opposed to like, well, kind of, it's almost like it's about time. So not necessarily celebrating it like, oh, let me pat you on the back for doing something that should have been done. But in a sense, it is like saying, but thank God somebody eventually did it.
Mm,
Because there are individuals like myself included. I remember, a couple of decades ago, I remember when, uh, if you had braids, you couldn't get certain jobs with braids, right? And
mhm.
so I grew up in that culture, and it was because braids was associated with Bloods and Crips life and street life and turf life and et cetera, et cetera. It was associated with that from a Eurocentric point of view. Um, Now, obviously, if you're part of the culture, then you knew it was deeper than that. You knew that, these braids represented something that's been in our culture from the origination of the first snap that came out of the first human being's head on this planet. We knew that there's always been braiding. But anyway, I remember when I had to I would have to get a job with a shorter haircut. Then I'd let my stuff grow, and it grows fairly quickly, and I let it grow, and I'd end up with the braids, and I remember that they'd come up. I considered myself always an activist, so when they would come up and they'd say, and I would expect it, well, you can't really wear. Well, now I've passed my probationary period at the job and all of that, and by that time, and no, I shouldn't have had to do all of that, but I'm looking at myself like I've had these pretty prestigious positions in life time to time, and I want it to look like the stereotype. I
Right.
wanted to look big dude with the braid so that they see that this you can look like this and be intellectual. You can look like this and be all the things that anybody else can do whatever with whatever hair they have.
Right.
And so I helped fighting for that. And I remember they would say, "Well, no, you can't wear that because of this or that." And I'd say, "Well, it's part of my religion because Black people have been religiously doing this forever.
Mhm.
Mothers and grandparents and aunties and sisters and some men in some cases get closer to their children by braiding the hair and them sitting in the lap, and it's the touch and the feel and this, and even with the twist and the dread. So all that to say, I come from the era where you couldn't just, if you're an American, you couldn't just wear your hair a certain way. So for them, if they're finally, since they finally said, at least in this state, and it makes sense that it would happen in this state of California, it's very, it tries to be very anti-oppressive. It
It
makes the
tries.
attempt, tries very hard. And so I look at, if they say, if it's now, or you can, you can't discriminate against the hair and that, I say kudos to that. And I think it's less to do with celebrating like something that we already deserved, and more about like, you damn right we should have the right to do this. But the only way we were going to get it is for one of them to sign something saying it.
I
I'd
think that's the
rather them sign the
problem.
thing
I think
saying
that's
it
one of
than
the
not.
okay, like you said, cornrows and braids. They identified that with gangs, right? Something like
Right.
that, right? Like Aryan brothers, they have bald heads. Nobody relates bald white men with Aryan Brotherhood, right?
We do. Well,
Yeah,
that
because
that's not true. We do.
no,
I don't
we
feel
see a
comfortable when I
bald
see a
man.
white man with a bald head unless he's singing hip
No,
hop.
you see a bald man at your office. You're not thinking anything about a bald man in your office. It's just
It
natural, right?
depend
It's
on
just
the
normal. It's
it
a
depend
hairstyle.
on how cherry red the neck is.
Exactly. There's other factors that go into that. But the average person doesn't see a white man with a bald head and think Aryan Brotherhood, but you with locks, you with locks, right? Me with cornrows. There's so many things that go into mind. Just we're invisible, right? Like we're the first ones seen, but they don't see anything when they see us, right? So I want to ask Todd. Um,
And welcome,
Can,
Todd. So is your voice, you all connected? You
I
in?
hope so. Can you hear me?
yes,
I can
sir.
hear you.
Or,
Welcome.
or
Welcome to Situation and Circumstance.
modern technology. And
So
my
we're
Right?
just talking about a code switching a little bit and being able to maneuver in fields, and jobs, environments, being yourself, or is it necessary? Well, we see that is necessary, but is it worth that sacrifice to kind of go against the grain, or cut your hair a little lower, or wear that suit and tie, or say hello ma'am, hello sir, versus other words? What's your experience with code switching, or just that idea?
I think it's ultimately what your goal is, what you're going for. I think when I was in college, I would have said you never, quote unquote, change who you are. But then as you grow up and you get out into the professional field, you begin to see that you have to adjust to have some maneuverability and have access. And I think you have to weigh what your battle is going to be. For some people, they're okay with cutting their hair if it means that they get a higher position and can affect change in different ways. For other people, their hair is the battle itself. And so, they hold off. I think for each person, it depends on what they're sacrificing for.
I dig it.
Although every Black person I knew voted for President Obama, I don't know if they would have voted for him if he had cornrows. So if President Obama doesn't have cornrows, but he becomes the first Black president, what's more important, that he held on to his cornrows or his braids, or that he became the first Black president? And I think each person has to kind of ask that for themselves. What is it that they're going for versus what are they holding on to?
And do you think that's a problem?
Definitely.
Because Obama with cornrows would have been, I bet you Obama with cornrows would have got in before somebody who was jet black with no cornrows and all the other needed up stuff.
Well, if we're talking about colorism, then of course, I don't think.
I mean, and I know we were talking about something, but
yeah, I wouldn't have an argument about colorism. But
let me know when I can chime in.
Please, I want you too. I know you heard that. I want you to come in. And basically, I brought a ringer with me. If you don't mind, have someone else come and speak on this as well, just because. Nikia, what is your emphasis of study on?
I'm doing the Black British middle class.
Yeah, so she's going for a PhD, and her emphasis of studies on the Black British middle class. So I might have her chime on this as well. But when it comes to the colorism argument, unfortunately, I mean, I think it's separate in the sense of, light skin, dark skin. We know that there's a hierarchy. Many people may not acknowledge it, but a dark skin Obama wouldn't have been voted in as quick as a light skin Obama. However,
that's all I was saying. And welcome, Yoel. I see you.
Hey, what's up, Yoel? His audio may. Oh.
Can y'all hear me?
Now we can.
Yeah, you're in.
Okay, come in here though. That's why I was hoping you would hear some of that and come in. But if I may throw in one more point before Yoel chimes in, I think to go back to it. I think it depends on exactly what we're going for. Is it important to simply have that image or that figure of a President Obama in and of itself, the first Black president, or do we need our leader to look a certain way, and does that indicate that he represents us better? I think that depends on who you're asking. For me, it's important to have that Black figure, but I need him to do something. I need him to have a substantive, productive career, and whatever that might be. Whether his hair is cornrows or not, it's to me, it's the legislation he pushes through, it's a change that he accomplishes. So,
no doubt.
Well, what's interesting about what you're saying is that we don't even have to talk about necessarily a European visual at this point. In other words, there are a certain amount of Black people that wouldn't have voted for an Obama with braids. And so there we kind of talk about how much of this is self-perpetuated, right? We have assumptions about somebody who has a certain look to themselves in this skin. And then we want and we demand that other cultures, particularly people who are a little more Euro-centered, but we ask that they then acknowledge certain things that we are still, I don't want to say figuring out like we're ignorant to it, but we are still figuring out the magical tapestry of how all of these parts of being what we look like fit in with each other.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yoel, what's happening with you, bro? Welcome to Situation and Circumstances.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
I also see somebody behind you, Todd. Hello,
Yeah.
back there. I see a queen back there with you. Hello,
Exactly.
queen.
Hi. I'll
Right.
chime in when you call on me, so I'll wait. I'm making my list of things to disagree with.
are you checking it twice?
No, I have these arguments
All right.
all the time, so I'm ready whenever you are.
Got you. Yoel, I don't know how much you heard. Of course, welcome to Situation and Circumstance. We're kind of just jumping through a few different hoops right now with discussion on code switching. Should we have to code switch? What does that look like? Pros and cons of that. And ultimately, we're having a discussion on Black boys and Black men and how we have this sometimes just like we're wearing an invisibility cloak, and sometimes that's um, I don't know. I almost want to say sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes a bad thing. Some smoke we might want to go under. But what are your thoughts?
Kind of like what Todd said. It's all about the goal. You know, what are you doing? Excuse me. What are you doing it for? Like, what's your goal in mind here? So some of us kind of have to infiltrate through, corporate America, to hopefully create our own opportunity one day once we learn to trade in these corporate grounds, right? So once we create this opportunity for ourselves, we're able to employ others. But that can be sometimes we get lost in the sauce. Sometimes we never end up creating our own because we just keep climbing this ladder. It's almost like a rat race at that point. So we got to kind of be clear on what we want before we go ahead and execute that way. And that's kind of been my experience, just understanding, the trade, the information I need to gather and just get up out of there and just create my own so I can help others. That's just kind of how I see it. Feel like it's the best way.
That's real. And see, there's people who are willing to do certain things and some are not. Like I have my hair locked up. I got a tattoo on my hand, and I know I'm gonna take many L's in life, but I'm happy. You know what I mean? That's the goal that I'm trying to push forward. Being yourself while still being happy, right? Despite the money. Whereas there's some people who are like, okay, let me sacrifice a haircut. You know what I mean? Let me sacrifice one tattoo in order for me to be able to put all of my other people on. I just might have to go a different way. We have many different methods to the same goal. And I think once we understand that, I think we can move forward despite the lack of uniformity. You know what I mean? As long as we're united, I don't think anything else matters, but we always get stuck in uniform. And that slows us down, because I agree. I think a whole lot of people wouldn't have voted for President Obama if he was darker skinned, or if he had cornrows, or if he had locks, or if his wife was dark skinned, or if he didn't even have a wife, right? Or if he was atheist, right? There's so many that matter, but does it really matter? Right? As long as the goal, or as long as the person that you're asking for does that job well, why does it matter? Right? But it seems like us as Black.
Aren't we actually? And I want to pose this question to. I called you Queen, but I didn't get your name.
Nakia.
With an N like Nancy, Nakia.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, look what I just did there. Y'all feel an N like Nancy, right? I could have said an N like Nakaraya or something else, right?
It's okay.
It's okay. Forgive me if that was, I grew up in this white man's world. I didn't.
Didn't all. We're having this conversation in English. Yeah.
Yes. I wonder if is it more worth it for us to, how do I want to say this? Is it more worth it for us to discuss this in a platform that includes our children? In other words, should we be having this same conversation with our children in the room when we're talking about this? Or does that does not make a difference. Like how do you look at how children are affected by the same thing that we're talking about?
Well, I think children are infected because you have to interact in society. So it's not just how your family is relating to you, because I think we have to distinguish, and that's a point for discussion because I'm sure we'd all disagree with that, like root causes of the problem versus expressions of the problem. And I feel like this issue of representation is an expression of the problem, just like you were talking about earlier, the invisibility of Black men. That's an expression of the problem. I don't think that's the root cause. And I think in terms of having to present oneself a certain way at work, I think that's the problem, right? You go in there as an individual. You are going in an environment that is white, backed by the power of whiteness, and you go in as a Black individual, not backed by a whole group of Black people who can come in when you've been mistreated at work or you're not able to advance at work. You're going in as an individual versus a group. So I don't even know if you're in a position to have the agency to be able to say what decisions you're making. No, you conform to the rules of that environment because that's the expression of being Black in this country. That's what oppression looks like. That's the expression of it, is you don't have the agency to have a voice at work and decide how to get hired and how to get fired. None of that applies.
So when do you?
Well, would we have voted for a white candidate with cornrows?
Of course we vote for a white candidate because symbolism.
No, I'm saying would we vote for a white candidate with cornrows?
Yes, because
I guess or with the mohawk. I don't know if that's
because
I don't know
the
if
symbolism. People love the symbolism of being a Black culture being accepted without power actually being given to Black people. So we love it when people use our slang, they try to look like us. People say, yeah, they appropriate our culture because our culture is dominant. That's true. But if you don't have any ownership of the way that culture is reproduced in any media, they've done nothing really, but the symbolism is there. So I think that's what we like to see versus having any actual power. So I think people would love a white candidate with cornrows. They feel like, oh, look, he's on our side. He accepts Black people. He sees the culture. Absolutely not. But that's what we're drawn to. And I think that's because these are the kind of conversations we have to say, okay, what's really going on here? Is it just the representation of what inclusiveness looks like, or do we actually have a say-so? It's like the different levels of power, right? It's one thing to be invited to the meeting, but you have to be the one setting the agenda. When you're always invited to the meeting, and we are, because that's what it means to be oppressed in this country, you know that you didn't have any real power. You're just there because you have to be, but you never set the agenda.
And let me throw this out. When we think about Bill Clinton, one of the seminal images of Bill Clinton is him playing
the saxophone
on Arsenio Hall.
There you go.
And then
I was gonna go there with it. You beat me to that. You beat me to it.
Who he was, and he was technically the first Black president. But when you look at a lot of the policies that Bill Clinton pushed through, I mean, come on, Michelle Alexander? I think she does a great job of showing how basically they just manufactured slavery through the jail system, and that was pushed by Biden and Bill Clinton. Not to mention the fact of NAFTA. Not to mention the fact that he upstaged a coup in Haiti. I mean, he's done a ton of things that affected Black people, not just in this country, but across the planet. But you ask my mom and many of my aunts and uncles, they'll tell you that Bill Clinton was one of the coolest presidents that we had.
But Obama is the same way. The joke goes, all the Black people had to lose their houses to get one Black man in the White House. And to this day, you can't say it because we can't separate someone who's sexy, right? A beautiful family. We can't say, wow, they're a beautiful family with god-awful policies for Black people. We don't know how to separate that. And I think that's part of the deprivation, because you're always not represented in, Blackness is represented in such a one-dimensional way. Like, I lived overseas for a number of years, and people who've never been to the US love to tell me about what Black culture was. And really, it's white representations of Black culture. So it's hip hop, it's a few icons that we have, and that's not what culture is at all. But I think that's exactly it. We love to have this image of respectability, of beautiful people, and we need to understand we can have that, but they can't be the ones representing our interests, and white power no less, especially when white power is what backed Obama to the White House.
That's very interesting.
At what point do we do that? Because if the consensus is that this is not our game to make choices, if the consensus is that we can't do that without their power or without their cosign, at what point do we take control? Whether it be political, whether it be, what is it?
I think it's cooperatively, because I think what we've been doing is putting it on the shoulders of individuals, and you can't do anything as an individual.
Absolutely.
And that's the expectation, is that back to Obama, like when we elect anyone, we expect them to go and make the changes. No, we have to constantly push. Like there's a man that I like to listen to, Chris Hedges, and he says all politicians are either corrupt, incompetent, or both. We have to be the ones to push. And I think it's with our politics deciding what that's going to be and doing it cooperatively together, not putting it on one individual leader, but educating each other, debating these issues, because we're going to come to look at the same data, come to different conclusions. That's got to be part of the debate. Sometimes going along with things we don't agree with if the group thinks it's in the best interest. But I think it's that, like, organizing cooperatively.
And if I might
But I think when it comes to like specifically with Obama, so there's this part of right where Obama wasn't the president of Black people. Obama was the president of the United States, and so I feel like there are things, notably some of the changes that he made in individuals' ability to apply for home buyer assistance, home buyer loan, first time. What do you call store? What do you call store own loans to open up stores and things like that? He did some things that he changed, and this is not me doing the like. I love that he was a president for way more reasons than what he actually did in office. Just whether it had to start with him the same way it had to start with me with short hair, and then I had to let my braids grow while I was in there so they could see. Like, there's a reason why he threw things. You think it was an accident that he mentioned the word Newport, that he smoked them? No, he did that for a reason. He knew smoking Newports is associated with Black people. You think it's an accident that he showed himself shooting a basketball on the court? There's a lot of things that he did, whether a person thinks they're right or wrong, that he was trying to, and I hate to use those stereotypes of Black, but those are things that our culture, some of the things our culture likes. I'm saying all that to say that I feel like there's certain things that he did that he couldn't get a bullhorn and say, hey, I actually did this thing so to make it a little bit easier for people of color. He couldn't get on a bullhorn and say it, but for those who are paying, I don't want to say paying attention, but who were invested in seeing just how much would happen and would not happen, there were some things that happened that he couldn't just say this is for Black people, because white people are in there doing it for white people all day, but they don't get to, Trump might say it in a minute, but they don't get to say, I'm only doing it for white people, even if that's all they're doing it for, if that makes sense. So there is some things that he did that were a little bit helpful for us while in there. Not saying it was the amount that should have happened, but there again, as you spoke to earlier, he's not the.
No, I think it's telling, because I think Nakia brought out a good point, and I'm not suggesting that you're doing this, but I've had these conversations where when you critique President Obama, you can't have an open discussion without somebody suggesting that there's something wrong with you. So this is what I mean. I do think there were maybe small changes or things that he may have, let's say, brought to the surface that were somewhere beneficial. But when we look at substantive policy, for example, President Obama installs or selects or chooses the first Black Attorney General, okay? Eric Holder. I'm like, cool. It's good to see first Black Attorney General. Perfect. I'm expecting that Black Attorney General to do things that President Obama doesn't have to say he's doing them for Black people. For example, simply going through different police departments that just on the surface shot African-American youth and trying to in some way hold them accountable. We saw very little of that. Then if you want to stop focusing on Black people, let's look at the bailout. Not only did President O allow the banks to cash in on however many billion, I think it's roughly another 400 or 500 billion. He puts that out there, but then he doesn't hold the banks accountable. There are no strings attached to the money. The people don't get their homes back, meaning the residents. He doesn't force them to come up with a plan to make sure this doesn't happen again and that there's some type of audit, nor does he even push Congress to say, here are a new set of rules or laws that we will put in place to hold these people accountable. So it's almost like he just continued whose policies? The Bush era policies. Then we look at places of war, where he extended some of the things that President Bush had done without even, I would say, engendering or kind of re-engendering the same type of that familiar attitude or favor that we had to other countries. Now, why do I bring this up? I say all this to say, we don't hold President Obama accountable for certain things because he was the first Black president and because they were so wrapped up in it. But there were so many different things that he could have done further that he didn't have to push just because there were Black people involved or just because it looked a certain way, or just because he's the first Black president. But it seemed like he just allowed the status quo to continue. That, at least that's my piece on it.
Okay,
Yeah,
before we continue, let's take a break because we're getting a little bit off topic with the politics. You know, we're just trying to stick to the idea of code switching and maneuvering in environments that we're not really accustomed to, and if it's necessary.
I must say, like, I think that's a political question, to be honest, because the fact that we have to go into the environments, the question is like, why is it that white supremacy demands that? And we can talk about Black men. Like, I think it's so powerful that Black men are here having this conversation. You don't see that on the platform. So I'm glad to whoever organized that. I'm not sure which one did, if that was you, Mr. Anthony, or, it was you, Mr. Spencer. Fantastic. But I think that it's all related to politics. Absolutely. The fact that is even the issue, because if you look back with the New Negro, that movement in the 1920s, it was about like Black masculinity and manhood and what that looks like. And the question was like, why did it have to be crafted in such a way, with appearance and being able to make white people comfortable and being able to situate in yourself in this environment that was trying to stave off violence, really. And I think that's what the presentation and the performance and the respectability is about. I mean, and I think that's the question I have, like, what do you think is behind that in terms of power, in terms of violence, for having to even craft that sort of presentation?
And maybe it's a resurgence to go to that. I mean, when we think about the talented 10th, part of what Booker T. Washington was pushing out was you looked a certain way, you had to be light skinned, you spoke a certain way, you went to a certain school. But at the heart of it, to go to Nikia's point, a lot of it, I think, was to protect us. And I wonder if part of maybe the resurgence of this is because someone's saying, well, they're shooting us. Now, we know Black people kill Black people more than any other group, like most groups. But
not most groups, but yes.
Well, let's just shoot. If we take whites, the percentage, the number of whites who are killed by whites is arguably comparable to the number of Blacks that are killed by Blacks. You know, percentage wise, obviously the number is going to be more. But let's think about this. How many white joggers running through the streets right now could be shot by two Black men, not just in the midst of a pandemic at any time, but especially in the midst of a pandemic? And then when you think about Katrina, how many African Americans were killed outright, not by just white residents, but by law enforcement who were supposed to be protecting them? And so maybe part of this resurgence of this new Negro is because some people are saying, well, we have to do something to protect us. Why? To go back, not to get on President Obama, but because the structures in place aren't providing that protection.
Although I don't think it's effective, I must say, having a presentation. I think that's just an excuse that you have to use when power is challenged. It's like, well, because you don't look a certain way, when in fact it's like, well, we're the gatekeepers of power and we don't have to let you in.
True.
That's ultimately it.
Yeah, I'm not trying to justify, but I'm saying,
I don't think respectability politics works, or even the presentation. They had that whole haircutting thing, which was really disturbing to me. Right. Because in fact, the reason why your kids don't have jobs is because there's been mass unemployment for Black people for 80 years, and giving them a haircut won't do anything to address that issue, I think.
No,
it's absurd.
But
it won't do anything to address it, but it will. In terms of this. For the same reason that Todd so eloquently expressed, and I'm paraphrasing that you know, when we talk about these differences, and I almost don't want to bring up Obama's name again, but even when we're talking about the difference that his hair would have made, and how you were saying, well, having to make this choice of is it more important for me to just cut that hair off so I can become the first Black president, or would have been more important for me to make the point of I should keep my braids, although I may now be sacrificing this thing that may not happen in another 1,000 years, or whatever the case. And I feel like not only, first of all, we're having to make that decision all the time, right? We're always having to be faced with how much Black is okay at given times. And then even with that, and it goes to, and then, well, what exactly does that mean?
Yeah.
Right. When you're saying these things. So I want to go into that a little bit more on how those stereotypes, how have these stereotypes helped? How have they hurt? Have they helped in any kind of way? Have they did nothing but destroy? And what's our responsibility in not just destroying these stereotypes for other cultures, but what is our responsibility in getting a better understanding of our own culture? Because we don't even agree on, which is okay.
Hmm.
It's okay to disagree.
Hmm.
It's not, oftentimes it's about how we disagree, and in this show, we try to disagree in a real respect. So we're gonna go into this next. I think we have a clip lined up. Um, and then we'll come right back here at kcbzradio.com. We're here with at Situation and Circumstance. One time for your mind, baby.
So, yes.
So that was
Mm.
Jay being honored at, I believe, Columbia University earlier this year or late last year. But he was just talking about the ability of being able to walk into arenas and being able to be himself. So, and that slightly talks about what we were talking about earlier about a code switching or what the goal is ultimately. There was a time when Jay-Z wasn't able to walk into White Houses or walk into NFL boardrooms or do all of these things that we see him doing currently. But that's because he had to put on a little bit of that front, and able to get that capital, to get the money, to get that luxury. So we're going to talk a little bit about Tyler Perry and Spike Lee. There was a new show that came out earlier this year called Black AF with Kenya Barris. He's the brother who did Blackish, Grownish, Mixedish. And he has an episode in the new show. And he's like, we have to be able to call out Black movies and Black shows when they're bad. We can't just rally behind every Black show just because it's a Black show. And then he talks about men putting on dresses and how in Hollywood and how that's just so horrible and emasculates the Black man. And Tyler Perry came in, made a quick cameo for about 2-3 minutes, and he talked about how he owns everything that he puts out. Like he doesn't answer to anyone. Whereas a lot of Black producers and directors, they might write it, they might direct it. However, they don't have their own studio. They don't own the rights to their movies. So it was just a good conversation starter about Black men having to do certain things that others might deem as inferior or might deem as weak. But you have the other side of it, of them owning that very thing. Eddie Murphy, he played the Clumps, right? And I don't think, does Eddie Murphy own those movies?
No.
Yeah, right. So that's interesting. What do you guys have to say about the Spike Lee when he called him a coon? He called him saying that he made Black people look bad because all of his representations in movies, whereas Spike Lee, he's just Mr. Pro-Black, is Pan-African in the media, but he dogs fellow Black people while they're trying to do the similar things.
Is it similar?
Which in Spike Lee's, in his defense, he did. That was several years ago, and since that time, he has kind of recanted some of that.
Mm-hmm.
So just to throw that out there, but he did ultimately say that, but he did kind of recant some of how some of that was said. So there was some discussion on. I can't particularly remember the show I saw it on, and if I can find it, I'll mention that. But just to throw that out there.
Is it similar though? I mean, is what Spike was doing with Do the Right Thing and Mo Better Blues, is that similar to what Tyler Perry does when it comes to Medea? Because I would argue that, yeah, Tyler Perry can own his own studio and own the rights of production to many things because of the content in which he puts out.
Mm-hmm.
Would they allow Spike, who puts out films at least early in his career? Now later on in his career, we saw Spike has changed a few things. Well, changed a lot of things. I mean, this is the same person who made Navy commercials. And prior to that, he would have spoken against military forces and Black people being involved. So we've seen there's been like a de-evolution, evolution, however you want to call it. But would Tyler Perry have the capital or the currency or the agency, to go back to Nick Cave's point, if Tyler Perry put out movies that did what I believe Spike movies actually did, was kind of strike at the heart of not only white supremacy, but in a sense, our Black acquiescence, and kind of brought things to the surface and then forced us to look at ourselves and what part we play in white oppression. Does Tyler really do that?
It feels like they both have done that, though. I feel like in both cases, whether it's Tyler or Spike, excuse me. But I feel like in both cases, it was giving us an opportunity to look at, whether looking at meant look at us seriously or look at us in a comical way, right? So the example I would give, like, people got up and roar because he made because Mr. Brown had extremely ashy knees. Well, that same day I watched that first episode, my grandson was here and his knees looked the same way. Now, was it 'cause we showed us how our ashy knee looked that was the problem? Was it that we're suggesting that every black person can acquire those kinds of ashy knees? I think that there's this thing at which when we look at stereotypes and how we're treated, I think that it's important to continue to mention that um, we are still formulating, like, what it means to be black is still, it's still, there's some dots behind that. It's still in development. Um, because so even when we look at, and I don't know if either of you were with us earlier when we talked about the little boy and on the playground, a little black boy, a little white boy, and a little black boy said, "Hey, I murder you all over the court," and they were talking about basketball, and the yard duty took it the wrong way, and actually he was just saying, I'll beat you really bad. I'm good at this sport, and I believe, and I'm cocky about my abilities here. But the reality is, okay, so Bernie Mac said at one point in time, he said, well, we'll say something like, hey, do what I told you to do, for I'll whip the skin off your bones. Now, there's a black parent who'd say something like that and say it in front of the wrong person, and that person's like, whoo, he beat the skin off his bones. Oh my, what's really going on there? Now, whether the argument is about if that's appropriate to say to a child or not, because of our history, there is a part of our of how we speak, or our demeanor or our culture, that has violence attached to it, and thusly some of us speak a certain way. So I guess I'm saying that to say, what have each one of you what have you or have you had to change something as a result of a stereotype, in whichever way that went, whether it was because of a negative one or a positive one? Have you had to acclimate, or anything like that, or have you just done like, hey, I don't hold nothing back, I say it all, and regardless, I don't feed into that. Uh,
Yeah.
and I'm sorry, and before you answer, I just want to make sure because I'm really excited to hear what you're gonna say. And what I mean by that is like being passionate about something, and you're at work and you're passionate about the way you disagree with something. You're not angry, you're passionate. Now, if you were angry, it's actually no law about getting angry. It's what you do after you're angry, but there's no law about getting angry. But oftentimes we will shut down the anger part because we know other cultures, right? When they see us get angry, then there's this other thing that happens. So sometimes you might feel like, well, hey, well, I better not act, I better calm it down because I might scare the white people, even though I'm not going to do nothing harmful. So I wonder how that's played a part, if any, with any of you.
Yeah, that's happened in my. I worked at a Best Buy for a couple of years, and I worked at a credit union. In both jobs, man, I've had to do those very things. I've been tested. People have called me ghetto. People have called me said my hair looks like where I hide drugs. And this is like real time. You know what I mean? Like, I don't. It's life. You know what I mean? Like it's America. I'm old enough to know that certain things just aren't going to change in my lifetime. But the reason why this lady called me ghetto, I presented myself the exact way I wanted to present myself, if that makes sense. Like it wasn't she perceived it as ghetto, but there's nobody else perceived it as ghetto. So I took that. My hair was similar to how it is now. A man in a wheelchair said that it looks like where I hide my drugs. He was privileged enough. He was white. He was privileged enough to to say that to me at my job. That's how good he felt. And this man is in a wheelchair. But my hair is exactly how I wanted it to be perceived in that moment. So when it comes to being who you are, or when it comes to changing how you speak or how you dress, I think we've all done certain things, even if they're subtle, even if there's subconscious, they're not even at the forefront of your thought. We have done certain things to get a job, or to get the car, or to get a lady, or to get a date. There's always going to be little things that we don't know that we're even aware that we're doing. However, as long as I believe, if you feel good about yourself, I think the rest matters. I think if Tyler Perry is happy and he feels that he is fulfilling his purpose, I think that's okay. As the same for Spike Lee. I feel if Spike Lee is doing exactly what he thinks he needs to do for Black people and for Black culture and for himself ultimately, I think that's fine. As long as it doesn't oppress us even more, or if it even oppresses us at all.
Well, I like to push back on a couple of those points. So I think you brought up a really interesting thing. And I think it is about not only, so there's a concept, and it's about cognition and misrecognition. So one is how you see yourself, and then it's how other people recognize you or misrecognize you. And I think the reality of being in a Black body, there's always going to be that association with criminality and violence. And that's nothing that you can escape being in a Black body. So I think there's ways to, other people don't recognize that depending on the person you're dealing with. And perhaps they have a lens where they look for other cues to say, how am I going to respond to this Black person? But it's always there. And I think people are always taking those cues to try to figure out who you are. And I think that is like the power of culture, how you embodied it. And that's something I study, because it's not just, culture is invisible, it's common sense. So you don't think I'm enacting Black culture, you just act. And that's the power of it, because it shapes the way you think, the way you move. I had a white friend, and she always thought by speaking, because she went and got her degree, and she thought by using her fancy language from her degree that she was presenting white middle class. And I told her, white working class is written all over you. The minute you walk in the door, anyone can see it, but she was trying to present something else. And I think that's just something that you live in. And that's why we really have to think about ourselves, not as individuals, but rooted in families, rooted in communities, rooted in societies, because nothing, we're always existing in relationship to other people. And in terms of Tyler Perry, I actually think I think it's more of a question of what we think media is supposed to do. Now, do we want to reflect the reality of Black life? Do we want to reflect Black aspiration? Do we want to reflect the fantasy? I think people like Tyler Perry because he shows Black people in big houses and sexy couples. And I think that's what people want to see. The dialogue's not great. And I don't think people want to see any sort of accurate representation of Black struggle. And I think that's something that
Is that to say? I'm sorry. Is that to say do you not believe that he is showing accurate depiction of particularly Black struggle in his?
Absolutely not. And I like soap operas. So I was raised on All My Children. I live for soap operas, but I think that it is absolutely a soap opera. I don't think that he wants to show an accurate portrayal. And I think if one says that he can show whatever he wants, that's fine. But I think that because, Black people don't own media, Black people we're not in the writers' rooms, we're not directing and producing. I think when you're there, you have responsibility, and that's just how I feel about it. And I think that, let's not forget, he's also anti-union, and given how Black people live, I think that's a big red flag for me. If you don't support unions, you can't support Black people and not support Black writers organizing to be treated fairly. So I think,
And I kind of on that, excuse me, on that note, I don't know, because part of that feels like that same part of what we say when we say, those of us who are part of that movement of every Black person that says something out loud on a camera is not necessarily, even if they say this is to all my Black folks, don't mean that they represent all Black people, right? And so there's this thing that I feel like nowadays, I feel like in the not the generation we're in, speaking specifically of our youth, but I think the times that we're in right now, I think that we're allowing ourselves to be a little bit more, or at least I hope, it could just be who I'm surrounding myself with. But I hope we're learning that it's okay to be black and be other things outside of what whoever else thought black should be like. And
Mhm.
part of doing so is maybe you didn't want to ever be a role model in your life. Maybe you're ill equipped to be a role model. Yet you found yourself being in that position because of some wonderful thing that you've created that has made you affluent. So whether you're an entertainer or whatever it is, now you got a lot of money. Now people are listening, but you never wanted to. You never asked for that position. You have someone that's like that, or someone who, hey, I just want to talk about the comical things about black people. Now hold on. When we say the comical things about black people, are we really saying the comical things about black people are the black people that you grew up with, which still would mean that you're talking, which, like, does that give you a right, right? Does the fact that I grew up in an all black family and most of the people in my family are, are black, does that give me the right to then pick and choose what parts of those black things I want to display in my art form?
Well, if you're a creative person, you can. But I mean, I don't think Tyler Perry is just any individual artist, because we know most artists don't have that kind of platform. So I'm speaking specifically about Tyler Perry and what I think, since there's you can count on your hand the black people at that level. Now, if you're an artist and you want to represent yourself individually, that's fine. But I think the problem, even with that, is that, yeah, you're that black artist, but then you take that fellowship that's set aside for black people, you participate in that curated show that's just for black people. It's like, no, don't do that. Then if you're not trying to represent something about blackness, be an individual and go participate in mainstream platforms, but you're shut out of that. So I think it creates a sort of contradiction. But I think certainly if you're an artist and you want to reflect what's right for you, because there are some white black people who didn't grow up in a black family, even Tommy Davidson, and I like him a lot. He was raised in a white family. Certainly,
Right.
if someone's saying that he has to represent anything other than what he is, I think everyone should be who they are. That's absolutely fine. But I think Tyler Perry, when he does a few things with white or mixed cast, but his come up came from presenting black life. And I think it was not, and I think it was presented in a way to say this is an accurate portrayal of black life. So it wasn't presented as science fiction, in which case we'd be in another place, or it wasn't even presented as a soap opera. Right. I think he presented it as that. And then the next question for me then is, why were people so receptive to that? And I think that's because what black people want to see. They want to see sexy black people in big houses. And I'm just saying, I would like to see someone who is at that level who could present something else. But then that's the question, like, would you get through the gatekeepers if you want to present that other image or message? I just don't know if that's even possible.
And just to add to that, I think it's telling that when you look at the characters that he chooses to portray, they seem to follow along certain lines. The majority of his early films always had what? A broken family. The mother, the kids, and the father was gone. Play after movie after play. Then here's what struck me. You create a Berdash-like character.
Wait. I'm sorry. Go back to what you said about who was missing. I missed that, and I wondered.
In Tyler Perry's early films, the father was missing. Missing as in he wasn't dead, he wasn't even killed, but he chose to just leave the family abandoned. He presented that. Not
Isn't
me.
there some accuracy in that?
There would be, but
like, aren't we disproportionately seeing that African American fathers? I mean, actually, according to statistics,
Right.
that's changing. So great news, all the black men out there. It's changing. More black men are taking a role, and actually, we're spending more times with our kids than our white counterparts.
Yes, we do.
Any of your men out there didn't know that.
Yeah,
Just throwing that out. But go ahead.
The CDC put out the report. We know about that.
Yeah, man. I think what he has done is he creates like a hyperbolic character, because he's exaggerated how many of us have come from the broken family, but he didn't exaggerate in the sense he didn't put out the statistics, but he does with his presentation. Then you add on the Berdash-like character. So he has, makes me smile. He has a man dressed up like a woman, trying to tell confused black men and black women how they should act. I think that's a little bit problematic. If we are to say, well, he's presenting black culture, or should I say, if he's here to say he's presenting us with black culture, how about he were to say, this is a comedy, or this is a soap opera, she said, or This is something that I saw, and I knew that you guys, you being Black folks and white folks, would be receptive to it. Why would white folks be receptive? Because it's also non-threatening.
They never complain about
right. They never complain about President O. They don't push. Let's be honest. They don't push for equal rights. They don't push to stop cops from shooting people.
Nope.
Their arguments typically involve this interplay of this quote unquote baby mom did this to this baby dad who was a drug dealer but not, or ex-con who couldn't read or learn to read or then got shot. And it's like I said, it's hyperbolic in what it does is it keeps us in a.
I don't know, man. I don't really. I have to disagree with that a little bit. And here's what's interesting. I find myself in these positions, right, especially lately, where I sound like I'm defending somebody that I may not be a huge fan of, but if I hear something that doesn't sit well with me, I just gotta mention it. So that's kind of with the Obama thing.
Right. Here.
Right.
Thank you.
I'm here because
I feel like we're a dangerous zone when we say things like and I'm going to paraphrase here, but when we mention things like he is not accurately depicting Black culture, as opposed to saying he's not accurately depicting Black culture as a whole, but certainly because and the reason I say that is because my wife, huge Tyler Perry fan, and I like some of his stuff. I like the plays early on more than I like some of the later stuff.
We can tell that. I see.
Yeah, she's a huge fan, but let me say this: it's not to say that I don't that I see some things in there that it's like, oh well, if that's Black, it ain't me. But it doesn't make me think it's not Black. It just makes me feel like I'm not that type of Black person. But I haven't seen him. I haven't seen a portrayal of anyone from what I've seen, whether we talk about him or Spike Lee or rest in peace to John Singleton. To me, all of those are elements of the Black experience. Some of them we've experienced more than others. So when I look at Julius, one of the things I love about this brother is that we have that thing of where he knows what it feels like to have grown up in a full-fledged family with a caring mother and a caring father, and they were the whole shebang. I, on the other hand, didn't really have a father there, and when he was there, it was worse. It was almost, it was worse. So if we were to do a movie about how we grew up, I'm sure there will be some things that'll cross and fold in with each other because of the Black experience. But I'm sure I had a very different Black experience than he did. Even with where I grew up, the difference between when I was in high school and went to the classrooms and it was Black History Month, I absolutely hated Black History Month because it was 4 or 5 of us at mostly white class. And soon as Black History Month came, it felt embarrassing. They talked about slavery and these different things, and people would turn back and look at you. Every Black person in those classes hated Black History Month. On the other hand, my older brother, who grew up in Oakland and went to not Castlemont, so one of them, whichever one he went to Oakland Tech, who went to Oakland Tech, which was at that particular time was majorly African American. When they had Black History Month, there was all kind of celebrations and things posted all over the wall, and they wasn't just talking about slavery. They talked about 1,000 different inventors and all of that different stuff. And he absolutely loved, people were cooking and all kind of stuff. So our experience, if we put that into an art form, is going to be very. And so I just think that we need to show a little bit more. I don't want us to ever tiptoe. I love what we're all saying and be Black and bold, but I think that we use certain words specifically when we say things like when we talk about Black people, Black culture, and we use that as the blanket, that we need to be a little bit more particular in what we say about those things, because we're still diving into and fully creating what this thing called us is.
But see, that's not what I'm
We
saying.
can't
What
even
I'm saying is this, because I said Black life, not Black culture. So I think that's very different, because what I mean by Black life, for example, because grew up.
I was actually talking about Todd though, but
Okay, well, I agree with Todd. I just said, hey,
but come on.
Go ahead.
But so
But come
I
on.
grew up, I didn't get 4 Black people in my class. I was the only one. And I love
She like, you should have been happy for them other 3.
Yes, that's what I'm thinking. He wasn't on his own. What's he complaining about? I was there by myself. And I think for me, it's about, so for example, let's say that I wrote something based on my life, being the only Black person in a white class, and then I build all of my movies on that. And I say, well, that was my experience. But would that be typical of Black life? No. And that's what I mean by that. So yeah, of course, you can have Black people experiencing all sorts of things, but I would not represent it as being typical. I would explain that that is a unique experience, and these are all the reasons why. And I would love if that were more part of it, because I think when we think about it in that way, we see that only particular kinds of Black life gets this sort of attention and platform, and it feeds into Black AF.
Yeah.
I love Black AF, by the way.
I'm not seeing it yet. I've not seen it yet, but to think about that sort of how typical is that? And when you get Black families on TV, all his shows he's produced, there's nothing typical about their life. Now, of course, yes, there could be a Black family somewhere that lives like that, and we know that he based it on his life Blackish. Right. But how typical is it? Like, how typical is it of Black life? And then I'm just asking the question, like, why is it that these very atypical, unique situations get presented over and over again? And it's like, we don't get the diversity of anything that comes close to representing a typical Black life. And I think Tyler Perry presents his as being typical, and I just don't think it is typical.
So I got a question for you guys.
Let me before you jump in, but to Mr. Anthony's point, and then I want to go to Drew's question. If you heard me say that there wasn't Black culture, then it must have been a misstatement. But I think what you heard me say was an exaggerated form of our culture. I typically use that, and I use the term hyperbole, because I think what Tyler does, and it goes, I think maybe Nakia explained it a lot better, was he takes an aspect of our culture, of Black life, and he stretches it and he adds onto it to put it in a certain frame so that we see it through a certain lens. And then he says, boom, this is Black life. Now, I didn't suggest in any way, shape, or form that some people don't live that way, but I am suggesting that there's a reason why that type of character or image or imagery of hyperbole, of caricature, maybe that's the best word, seems to get more play than other type of images of African Americans.
Although he has the right to do it.
Yeah.
I have a question. So in my brief observation of the Black folks that I've been around, we're really sensitive when somebody isn't representing our life, when someone isn't representing our culture, right? Cosby Show. A lot of Black people love the Cosby Show. Mm-hmm. That didn't particularly represent our lives, but it was very
not at all,
right? But we loved it. But if somebody does the opposite of it, say Boys in the Hood, or somebody does Menace to Society, we hate it, right? Because it's like it's a negative portrayal of a part of Black culture or a part of other Black lives. But when it's the Cosby Show and it wasn't very accurate, we loved it. You know, so my dislike is when we're hypersensitive towards different representations of Black life that we know exists here in America, right? But we just don't want it. We just don't want the world to see it. We only want that to be in our household. We only want that to be on our corner, in our block. We don't want everybody to see Menace to Society or Boys in the Hood. We only want them to see that Cosby life. But and we only have about 5 more minutes.
Now let me talk about. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mr. Anthony.
No, you go. You was ready. Go ahead.
I like that. I like what you
you was ready.
It made me think of of when Cosby Show was on and when Cosby Show went off. Part of the reason why it went off wasn't because of ratings, but because Bill, decided from reviews from Black folks and other people that maybe this wasn't as accurate. So he decided not to present that any further. At least that was part of the reason.
Which is why he did the other following show.
And I was just about
that's why he did
100%.
Different World.
Well, exactly. And that's why he put out other forms of like HBCUs. And then he produced, Black movies and stuff. And to go back to Tyler, it's telling to me that the things that he will produce, the things that he will portray, they seem to follow along a certain vein. Where Cosby said, hey, you know what? If you don't think that my life is accurate, fine. Let me give you the picture of an HBCU. Then let me give you a picture of a couple of movies that, where he would fund behind the scenes.
Right.
And I think that's what's problematic. And it goes back to Nakea's point. Maybe Nakea just expressed it better than I can or better than I did, was there's something to be said about someone presenting an aspect of Black life. But there's also something to be said about recreating or reproducing that same aspect over and over and over again, and then telling you that that's art. Whether or not he has the ability to do it, but does he have the obligation to show you another aspect?
So
and does he have the obligation to speak to those different aspects that he's showing you and say, hey, what do you get from this? What do you take away from this? And to gauge, lastly, and then I'm gonna let you guys go with it, the damage or the benefit from what he's producing. Because I'll go back to, if you continually present an image of African Americans as drug dealers and baby daddies and shiftless and all these other stereotypes and prejudices, what is it that we expect? Well, we've seen the result. Our country exports these images to other countries. And when people come over here, they see us in a certain light. Our country exports these images to people in the same country. And then when they see us on their street or when they see us in their neighborhood, how do they view us?
But I tell you though, like I have no problem.
But hold on. This is we might have to have a part 2. and I'd love to, and certainly both of you would most certainly be invited to that. We may have to have a part 2 on this. There's a lot more to say. But you know what? And we're about out of time. And as always, we promise our listeners that we will continue to make beautiful mistakes. We embrace the opportunity afforded by our ancestors to speak, whether right or wrong, weak or strong. We be learning humans working on liberation and scaffolding a meaningful and fair existence for all. Until the next time, my netches, uhuru.
Yeah, I do like the outro. I like that beat.
They're not messing
No, they professional.